We are about halfway through the NHL regular season, and with that being said, the New York Rangers are not at all looking like a playoff team. So, in today's video, we're going to take a look at something that I think the New York Rangers really need to do, and honestly kind of must do at this upcoming trade deadline and a little before that, and that is to trade away some players who could possibly end up being some guys who may not be kind of long-term pieces on this team, but can kind of net you some assets, whether it is, draft picks and or prospects. Maybe it's a young NHLer. There are a lot of different kind of moves that Rangers can make at this deadline to go out there, trade away some guys, offload some assets, and also get some kind of long-term assets back in return, though. And that's kind of the big thing with this Rangers team, with how bad they've been this season. Even if this team somehow did squeak into a playoff spot, somehow got into a wild card spot, they are more than likely going to be a first-round exit. So, if we're being honest here, I think the best thing for this team long-term wise and kind of going forward into the future is to look at this season and this trade deadline as kind of a way of just kind of selling off players and getting some kind of future assets. And then obviously this Rangers team is not looking to go into a full-on rebuild. So with the assets that you've maybe possibly kind of gained at this deadline, you can go out there and kind of use those assets in the future, but also possibly this upcoming offseason to help you go out there and kind of make that trade for a star/superstar level player that we all know this Rangers team needs to add. If we want to see this kind of Rangers team, get back on track towards the winning ways and truly competing for a cup and really looking to go on some long playoff runs and, actually have an intention on possibly winning that cup, you got to see this Rangers team go out there and make some big moves, add in some really good players, and, going out there and trading away these assets, getting more picks and prospects in return definitely can help with the idea of going out there and trading for a very valuable player. So, we're going to take a look at some forwards and defensemen that the Rangers definitely should be looking to trade away in today's video. So let's get right into it here and start off with the forwards, where we have three players. First off, Riley Smith, and that is a guy who I think it's pretty much a no-brainer. He was picked up this past offseason by the New York Rangers from the Pittsburgh Penguins for about a second and a fifth round pick. I think the value is about fine. I mean, it wasn't too far off of what I really kind of thought was fair. I think it was about a fair deal for kind of both sides. The fifth round pick was pretty much, you could say, for the Penguins retaining a bit of salary. So about a second round pick for a rental Riley Smith there. The fifth round pick to retain some cap. So, it is what it is. Obviously, it hasn't quite worked out necessarily for the Rangers because, halfway through the season, this team is not at all looking like a playoff team. So that sucks there for sure. But I do think Riley Smith is someone the Rangers definitely need to trade away and very well could end up netting back maybe a third and a fifth round pick, or maybe it's like a third and a sixth, or a conditional third that could go up to a second if, he ends up playing, all the games in the playoffs and they make it all the way to the conference finals possibly. Something like that. You never know. But Riley Smith is definitely someone who I do think could be a kind of nice target for a contending team. He's not going to be obviously a guy who's going to cost a ton. He's, like I said, you're looking at like a third round pick, maybe at most possibly. Maybe it's like a third and a sixth, like I said, maybe a little over a third at the very most. So I don't see him, costing a ton. So I do think he makes a lot of sense for most teams out there. The Rangers, are definitely not in a spot to be necessarily kind of hoarding, expiring contracts with the way this team has been playing so far this season. So trading him away and opening up a spot for, another young guy, maybe a guy like Brendan Hoffman, definitely would not be a bad idea at all. Then next up here, we have Jimmy Vesey. Now, this is someone who, I don't think you necessarily kind of have to really look to trade, but if a team is going out there and offering you like a fifth round pick, I think you pull the trigger on that for sure. If it is like a seventh round pick, maybe you don't, and you just kind of want to maybe re-sign VC in the offseason. And either way, you could look to kind of trade away VC, and he could very well end up being the guy the Rangers kind of re-sign just because they have so much familiarity with him. But I do think that VC is a guy who, could be a nice little fit on possibly some kind of fourth line to add some depth to a contending team. He's obviously not going to be some, top nine forward necessarily for a true kind of Stanley Cup contending team, but he could be a nice kind of, extra forward, healthy scratch kind of guy, or possibly fit somewhere on a fourth line, just provide some depth and, a bit of energy out there. He has a bit of talent, obviously, not a bad player. So I do think could be a somewhat decent pickup for a playoff team. Then you've got Mika Zibanejad. Now, this is the one that, it's pretty much, if it's possible to trade him away, maybe you look to do that. That's kind of the question there, and it really does kind of depend because we heard the rumors And I came the other day with Nick Kyprios, the former NHLer, obviously talking about the Rangers and Mika Zibanejad possibly, Zibanejad not wanting to waive his no movement clause to possibly go out west, to the West Coast there and play with the Vancouver Canucks. So does that kind of hinder a whole market of teams there, on the western kind of side of things that Zibanejad's not willing to go to now? That limits the market quite a bit. So that can have a pretty big impact on whether or not you can trade away Zibanejad, but I do think you probably have to retain some money and you probably have to give up some good assets alongside Zibanejad to make this happen, especially if you are getting back a star-level player in return, like, it would have ideally been a JT Miller, but maybe now that's not going to happen, unfortunately. So either way, I do think it makes a lot of sense to look to trade away Zibanejad, although it's not going to be easy with his contract, the way he's been playing. It's really going to be tough to move him away. And also, the assets you're going to have to give up alongside him to get rid of him, I think it's just going to be a lot. And also, retaining some money as well might not be the most ideal situation. But if you can trade him away, I definitely do think it is not the worst situation for this Rangers team, and very well could end up being the best thing for Zibanejad to kind of get that reset, let's retool, go to a fresh kind of market there, a fresh team, and just kind of get a new look on his, hockey career. And that's it for the forwards. And, I could have obviously added in, guys like Kreider, maybe Sam Carrick to this list. But personally, I don't think those two players are really must moves. You got a guy like Sam Carrick who, just signed a 3-year deal with this Rangers team with a $1 million cap hit per season. This past offseason, I think he's a guy who you look to hold on to. He's not going to have a ton of value. So what are you getting? A 5th-round pick at the very, very best. With him being signed for a few more seasons at $1 million, I think he's a fine 4th-line center, so keeping him makes a bit of sense. You obviously still want to have some kind of veteran guys in this team who obviously have that physicality and toughness, so I think having him as your 4th-line center, even going through this kind of retool mode here, whatever you want to call it, definitely is not a bad idea at all. And then Kreider there with his kind of, issues with the injuries, it definitely doesn't seem like his value would be too great, so personally, it just makes no sense at all to trade him away. And I also, don't love the idea of trading away Kreider. I think keeping Kreider around is not the worst idea. I know some Rangers fans have some mixed feelings and opinions on it, but personally, I think keeping him around, he's got that veteran leadership. He's been around here for so long. He's pretty much like, the Mr. Ranger of this team, obviously the longest tenured guy. He's got so many records. Let's just hold on to him here. Let's keep, a nice, good goal-scoring veteran kind of forward. Obviously, he's not in his prime anymore, but he's still a solid player on a manageable cap hit, so I think keeping him makes a lot of sense, especially with the injuries being a pretty big factor and probably negating quite a bit of trade value that he does have. And now for the defenseman, and we'll start off here with Ryan Lindgren, and I think personally, this is a no-brainer. If you can trade him away for pretty much anything, you got to do it. I mean, with the way he's been playing, him being an expiring contract, I just don't see it working out long-term with the Rangers and Lindgren. So I don't want to see him be re-signed this offseason. Him being an unrestricted free agent means he's, a rental for a possible, contending team or a playoff team or a playoff hopeful. So maybe he does get traded away and picked up by a team who's maybe looking to kind of fight to get into the playoffs. And maybe he's just kind of a nice depth piece for some squad out there. I mean, he's also a guy who, like a lot of Rangers players, very well could end up, getting traded away. And, I'm not saying he's going to turn into some, superstar kind of guy, obviously, but maybe Lindgren can just kind of play better hockey and just not be kind of a liability at moments, just be a decent kind of, bottom pairing defenseman for a team or, an okay kind of complimentary guy on the second pairing, whatever it is. I think he can still provide a little bit for a playoff team possibly if he does get out of this Rangers kind of, system and the way things have all been kind of going. So personally, trade him away. I'm not exactly sure what the value is because of how kind of bad he's been this season for the Rangers, really. But, if you can get like a mid-round pick, maybe like a 4th-round pick, I think you pull the trigger on that for sure. But at this point, you might not even be able to get that, which would definitely be a little unfortunate for a guy like Ryan Lindgren, who I, earlier on this season kind of had some hopes that we could trade him away for, a decent bit of value. And now for K'Andre Miller, and this is an interesting kind of player here because, I do think that if we can trade him away and get some good value back in return, I think you got to do it absolutely. But the problem is, he has been really bad this season and has been a complete liability at moments as well. He's been a direct cause to, it feels like multiple kind of game-winning goals for the other team. He's also just been a direct cause for multiple goals for their team in general as well, not just game-winning goals, but to tie the game up or give him an early lead, whatever it's been. I mean, he has been a big liability in games this season at moments. I'm not saying it's been every single game, but for the most part there, he has just not had a good season at all. It looks like he's kind of declined, and each season now it seems like his value is just kind of taking a bit of a step back, season after season after season, and this time around, it's no different. I think he has kind of dropped off in value a decent amount, especially with the way he's been playing, over the last few months. So it does kind of suck there because I think he was someone at one point who had a lot of value, but now with everything that's kind of going on there, I think his value has dropped off quite a bit. And I do think there is still some potential left in there for sure, but I'm not quite sure the Rangers are going to be able to uncrack that, which is a tough part because he is someone who, very well could end up getting traded away and ends up kind of really turning things around and becoming that, really great top 4 caliber defenseman that, I think we always kind of thought he could be, but just couldn't quite get to be there with this Rangers team. We have seen that moment for sure. He has flashed some great kind of skill and talent and just all around showing himself to possibly be like a top pairing caliber guy, but it's just the major inconsistencies and just lack of, great play. I mean, here and there, sure, he shows that elite talent or great, top 4 caliber talent, but he also shows way too much and way more of the kind of bad side there and the liability and just not being a great, overall defenseman. So that's kind of the issues there with K'Andre Miller, but I definitely do think if the right trade, comes across your table, if you're Chris Drury, you definitely have to pull a trigger on it, although, he's not a kind of must move because it's not like he's a UFA this upcoming offseason, but, he is someone who you look to try to trade away if you possibly can. And now we have Will Borgen, who was picked up by the Rangers in the Kakko trade, where the Rangers traded away Kakko over to the Seattle Kraken for Borgen, as well as a 3rd and 6th round pick. Didn't love that trade at the time, but obviously now, it still hasn't looked great, unfortunately. But I do think that, Will Borgen is someone who very well could and should be traded at this deadline. And with him being, 6'3", right-handed shot, pretty physical defenseman, solid defensively, I do think he is going to be a somewhat coveted player by multiple different playoff caliber teams. I think it makes a lot of sense there to add this guy in a kind of possibly, depth role or bottom pairing kind of role. I think, if he's your 6/7 defenseman, that's not too bad there at all. So I think that's fine for a playoff team. And, I do think that he's going to have a little bit of value. Maybe you're looking at possibly like a 4th and a 6th round pick, or maybe it's a 3rd round pick. Maybe there's a conditional 4th, something like that, something around there. I think you definitely can get a decent bit of value, although it's not going to be a ton. I do think about a 3rd round pick in value is definitely somewhat possible for someone like Will Borgen, as, sometimes around the deadline there, teams get a little desperate. I know the Rangers are kind of as well, but some of the playoff teams might get a little more desperate there and be willing to kind of give up like a 3rd round pick possibly for someone like Will Borgen, who I think is a fine defenseman, but definitely not a great one, but could be a nice addition for a playoff team. And now for the final player here, and I did talk about him in a somewhat recent video, and that is Zach Jones. Now, he is someone who I do think it makes a ton of sense to trade away, and I think it's kind of what's best for both the team and the player. This is someone who has been given permission by the Rangers to seek out a trade for himself, so it's a no-brainer. I think he's going to get traded away, and I hope he does as well because he is someone who has been kind of stuck on this team as that 6/7 defenseman. He's kind of been that first kind of healthy scratch almost every time, it feels like, with this team, and whether he's been the worst guy or not, and let's be honest, he has not been the worst defenseman on this team for the most part over the last couple seasons, but he is still been the guy who's healthy scratch quite a bit. He's missing a lot of game time. He's still a young guy trying to develop, trying to keep getting better and really kind of integrate his role in the NHL, so getting that trade away, getting a fresh start there definitely could be what's best for Zach Jones. And I do think he is someone who, could have a little bit of value out there. Maybe you're looking to get possibly like a 4th round pick plus, maybe a little bit over a 4th round pick. Maybe you're getting also like a 3rd round pick, maybe. I'm not quite sure about that. But, about a 4th round pick in value for Zach Jones, I definitely think is probably about fair. And I definitely would be willing to pull the trigger on that. Because, personally for the player as well, I think it'd be great for him to get away, but also, getting back some assets, whether it is, 4th round pick, I'm okay with that for someone like Zach Jones. So see him kind of go out there and just hopefully go to another team and get, full NHL time. I don't think he's ever going to become a star level guy, but I do hope to see him have a nice long NHL career. Anyways, that's going to do it for today's video. If you have enjoyed, definitely hit that like and subscribe button for daily New York Rangers content, and also definitely comment down below your thoughts on these players that I listed in today's video on possible kind of trade candidates for the New York Rangers. Who do you want to see traded away? What do you think we can get back in return for them? Thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Let's go Rangers.